If you hear someone say only webinars convert or the only real way to get engagement is a challenge launch, run for the hills. All launch types can be successful if they're aligned with you and your audience, and I've got the data to prove it. Let's dive in. Being an online business owner is full of ups and downs. Some days you can't imagine going back to your 9 to 5, and other days you want to burn your whole business to the ground. We get it.
Welcome to Chaos to Conversions, a podcast of practical, no BS strategies to grow your online business. Each week, we're chatting about launching, copywriting, mindset, and more, so you can make sense of the chaos and do more of what works.
Join the conversation and let's grow together. Hi, hello, and welcome back to Chaos to Conversions. This is kicking off my solo series of a deep dive into different launch styles. So over the next several episodes, I am going to talk about, first off, the fact that any launch strategy can work. And then we are going to do a deep dive into the different types of launch styles, like the challenge launch, a free versus a paid launch event. And we're also going to talk about evergreen and email only launches. So stay tuned, buckle up. We're going to call it Hot Girl Summer of Launching. But first off today, we need to get to the basis of you believing that any launch style can work. And I do know this to be true because I have seen every launch style work. It just is dependent on a lot of different factors. And some of that does require some testing. Some of it does require asking yourself some questions about not only you, but your audience. So let's talk about what those questions are and some ways that you can strategically choose a launch strategy that's right for you. So the first thing we're going to think about here is your audience and the timing of your launch. I know that we do have a lot of teacher business owners in the audience. A lot of my clients and also Branda's clients are teacher business owners. So they're working on a little bit of a different schedule for a couple reasons. Because A, teachers have more free time in the summer because they're not working usually, or at least not working in the classroom. But you might think of that as being prime time, and oftentimes it is, but they are often paid on a specific schedule. It could be a drawback because teachers don't necessarily want to think about school in the summer. Sometimes, of course, some do. You can't make everybody happy. And sometimes paychecks don't happen in the month of June or July, depending on a whole variety of factors like where you are in your district. So these are just some of the kind of trip ups I've seen with people launching in the summer. Though usually the time and teachers having the spaciousness and not being quite as burnt out does make summer a great time to launch. If we're thinking about business owners, right? Usually business owners are pretty busy during Q4 with planning for the next year, with Black Friday sales and season sales, holidays, just a lot going on, and are more so operating on not necessarily that like August to May or June schedule, but more of a January to December schedule. So they're going to be more flexible and oftentimes wanting to start something new come like Q1 can be a very popular time to launch. Specifically, that third week in January is a very popular time to launch, which again has positives and negatives because positives, right? Like people are generally wanting to get into something new in the new year. But if a lot of people are launching, it can feel a little bit noisy. Just some things to consider. You also want to think about your own energy levels and what you have going on. And I say this all the time, but what you've going on in your personal life. If you've kids home in the month of July and you don't have a lot of like free time, that can also make launching feel a lot harder. So think about like you and yourself and your own personal needs in addition to your audience. Now let's think about some of the questions that you might need to ask yourself when you are coming to the decision of what type of a launch strategy you might want to try. And if you've launched before, you generally have a feeling of like, did I like that style of launch? Did it go, all right compared to if maybe you've launched, this is your third or fourth launch? Do you always launch the same way? Do you think you might want to try something new? And even if you have a way that you particularly like to launch, as we're running through this list of questions, just think about your answers and kind of try and decide like, well, okay, is the way that I'm launching, like, does that line up with, the answers that I'm giving? So, like I mentioned, we are going to get into over the next couple episodes, we are going to get into a really deep dive of various launch types. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a really quick, brief definition here, and then we'll dive deeper in the episodes coming, or else this would be like a 2.5 hour long episode, and nobody wants that. So, okay, let's chat about that. So, the first thing to think about is, does your audience need a hands on experience? Does your content, whatever you're doing, whatever transformation you're providing, does your content lean more towards a hands-on experience or more of an educational experience? Do they need to experience a small win, for example, like a physical, they made this, they did this small win before they might want the rest of your program? So if the answer to that is yes, then you may wish to consider a challenge style launch. So, a challenge launch is a launch where you are going to take people usually through 3 to 5 days of specific steps that will get them a small win right away and makes it feel like they have accomplished something right off the bat. So this is good for any type of like skill-based offer if you're actually like teaching them to make or to do something, like make resources, for example, or if you're teaching knitting or a specific habit like time management or maybe even gardening. I've never worked with any like gardening clients, but like and I'm not a big gardener myself, but if you're leaning towards actually having them do something where it would be fairly easy for you to break the first steps down into little micro actionable steps, you may want to consider a challenge launch, which we'll talk more about next episode. But if it doesn't, if it is more educational and more informational, and yes, they will eventually get a transformation, but they don't necessarily have to like physically accomplish or do anything. If it's more about like knowledge or a mindset shift, or they're not actually like physically making anything, then we might want to stay away from a challenge launch and do something else like a free launch event or a paid launch event. So a free launch event could be anything like a free workshop where you're imparting information, a free boot camp, a free webinar, for example, any type of like free event that is imparting some type of information to them. The other question to keep in mind after we've answered the question about if your content leans more towards like physically doing something or more so informational, transformational, we also want to ask ourselves, is this something that you sell regularly, or is this something that you usually only launch once or twice a year? So if it is something that you might consider to be one of your most important launches of the year, again, you might want to consider doing something on the free launch event side, like that workshop, boot camp, something like that. Now, if it is not the most important event of the year, maybe this is something that you reopen quarterly or every other month, or it's actually ever enrolling, but you just do specific promotional pushes. But let's just say you sell it regularly. Then we need to ask ourselves, are you comfortable with doing live content? And if the answer is yes, then something simple like a free live webinar might be the answer. If this is something that you are selling regularly or promoting regularly and you can really perfect a live webinar, that might be the ticket because once we can get those sort of on lock, they can become really easy ways. Once you get it, it gets easier every time to promote your offer. Now, the other consideration that we have to take into account is the price of your offer. The high and low ticket can be very subjective to whatever your audience is. So, if you're in coaching space or something like that, high ticket offers, you might be thinking something like a four-figure investment. If we're talking about in the TPT space, we might be thinking $100 curriculum would be considered something high ticket. Or a course, for example, might be considered something higher ticket. I want you to think carefully about that because we most definitely do not want to usually put a pay gateway in front of a low ticket offer. So if you're thinking that your offer would fall more on the low ticket side, you might not want to do something like a paid experience. Instead, do something like a free launch event, like those boot camps, workshops, because what happens is when we put a paywall in front of a low ticket offer, you are going to alienate some of your audience. Now, if you are selling something that is high ticket, you could consider for your audience, you could consider adding a paid workshop or a paid webinar as a qualifier. You can also, of course, run a paid workshop. I've done this numerous times for many clients. You could, of course, run a paid workshop just like as a launch itself, and you're not pitching to anything else. But sometimes when we put that paywall in front of a low ticket offer, it would discourage people from, from enrolling and then in fact purchasing that larger offer. If you want to use a paywall as kind of a qualifier to see what type of people and make sure that you really only have serious people coming into your paid event, that can be a good solution. You'll also probably notice that over the course of the last couple years, you've probably seen quite a few events that have like free entry with like a paid upgrade, kind of like a tripwire, if you will, or an upsell, like a VIP ticket. Those oftentimes can convert pretty well and will, of course, bring you a little extra revenue in. So, when we're thinking about this, we just want to make sure we are asking ourselves the right questions. Does your audience need a hands on experience? Yes or no? Is this your most important or one of your most important launches of the year? Is this something that maybe you only offer once a year? You open and close it once a year. Maybe it's a year-long mastermind, or it's something that really requires people to go through it like chronologically, and you provide a lot of support, so you don't launch it very often. So is it your most important launch of the year? Yes or no? Is it high or low ticket? High ticket, you could consider putting a paid qualifier in front of it. Low ticket, I would probably not put a paid qualifier in front of it, but you could do something like a hybrid model where people pay for a VIP upgrade, they get extended access, they get extra resources, more support from you, something along those lines. And then, of course, the age-old question of, do you want to avoid going live? Because that could lead you down a road of maybe doing something like a pre-recorded video series versus a live webinar. Although I will say there is something special about the energy of being live. So these are the questions that I want you to think through and ask yourself as we are gearing up for the rest of this series, where we will talk about challenge launches, paid and free launch events, as well as email only launches and evergreen style launches. The right launch strategy depends on your audience's timing, your energy levels, and your offer price, in addition to some other factors. This is kicking off my deep dive into the next 3 episodes, where we are going to explore the pros and cons, as well as case studies of the challenge style, paid versus free launch events, and evergreen versus email only launches. If you're ready to find a launch style that works for you and no more cookie cutter launches, make sure that you join the waitlist to learn more about the next round of the Launch Reno. It's a high touch, done with you launch experience that matches your strengths, energy, and audience with your offer. The link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for stopping by to hang out with me today. If you want to learn more about how we can work together on a launch strategy or grab a freebie or one of the resources I mentioned, head over to duxburydigital.co/resources. I'll be back here next Tuesday for more practical strategies to take your business from chaos to conversions.